Do you sometimes ever wonder about writing? About the type of writing there is, like scientific writing, the symbols, and everything? Do you ever wonder about novels, how they ever get done? Or anything about how publications become available with novels and all sorts of books out there? Well, we're going to talk about stories and stuff, like story webs, about how they're made, and things like that. So I'm going to start you off with talking about story webs. Well, story webs are things you would use to start off with a book. You start off with creating what you would call the prologue, or the actual storyboard of how the book's going to play out. You would make webs, like a spider web pretty much, and use that as a form of layout for it. And there's also like the compare and contrast story webs and storyboards you can use to help compare for characters to show how they relate to each other and how they are different from each other. So now we're going with novels. You want to think about like books you read. Anything you would consider a novel: a scientific novel, a math novel, or even a novel that you just want to write yourself. A novel is pretty much a full story, sometimes chapters, which most of them do have. And some of them are just like small sections of short stories, which is a full novel with different stories in it throughout. Let's talk about story webs. Story webs are, like I said, a spider web. And I have an example for you. Like this. Here's one form of story web. You would use this to form out the main plot in the middle, and with the main plot you would use this main plot and relate it with the webs like this. You would show the relation to that plot, or the subject actually. The subject or plot is what you want to use for it. And then with these small circles next to this one, it would be the relation to the relation of the main subject. See, like it's connected and show how it would work out together. And that goes with everything around it, and you can also do it as many times as you feel right for the story. Along with that, you want to show, and the way you want to input this into a story is more like, you have the subject, like I was talking about, and you use that to add to the story, and basically, if it's a subject, of course, you want to add to the story and move along with it throughout certain chapters and everything. And when they don't need to be used, which I never use them, of course, I just use how I feel the story I want to go. And usually when I do that, I use how I feel. When I write a chapter, based on how I feel, like angry, sad, irritated, stuff like that, and pain, I would use that towards the chapter that I use, instead of using a story web and stuff like that. And like I said, there's different forms of webs that can be made. Another form of the web would be the comparison, which I think we all have seen before. You have the differences in one circle, in the middle we have the similarities. That's where it compares to people, more than anything else. People or scenarios of what's going to happen in the story. With chapters, that's where it all comes into play. There's different types of chapters, and like I said, there's short story chapters, and there's also chapters where it goes into a big story. Forms of chapters would be the short stories. Let's start with that. Short stories like this. Here's a book me and my class made in school. We had creative writing, and we made a short story book. Like, here's all the chapters. All this would be the chapters and everything. You have the short stories, and one of them would be called Deja Vu All Over Again by Wayne Gilmore, which is the title and author, and another one would be, which I'm going to say mine, is just The Half Demon Angel by myself, Timothy Benson. These are short stories based on chapters of a storybook. And well, here comes chapters that can be written and written not well. Like this, for instance. I was a nerd and wrote something based on Star Wars. I'm going to show you what I mean by chapters that shouldn't be written in a certain way. This, for instance, this is when I first started writing. My chapters were bunched together and weren't separated properly. That's how you know you don't want them to be made. Just like that. And when later down the road, when I got better for this, I started separating them out and started understanding the form of chapters. And I explain more about chapters. Each chapter is based on something that is based on something like based on a small subject of the story, pretty much. Like, the subject of the story is what continues the plot. If that plot goes along further, you want to make sure each subject of the story matches together and correctly forms the plot into understanding and making sure it goes to where it can end. You want to make sure each chapter gives a sign of something, a significant to each chapter. And when you do that, it shows it leads into it, but at the same time, it shows something is going to happen as you continue on. Something mysterious, something severe. A character could be killed, could be in pain, or something like that. A synopsis, for instance, is something like what the author writes about himself in the very beginning of the book. That is something not a lot of books have, but plenty do. That some of us will see. A synopsis is something where the author will talk about himself and how he created the book. Like where he got the files from, for the history of the book, if it's based on a video game, or if it's based off a major storyline of a movie or something. He had to get the files from the actual publisher to use it and make the book. So he would explain how he got that, how he got the stuff, how he made the book, explain how he felt about the book, and things like that. And overall, we went over how chapters are made, how they could be written correctly, how they could be written wrong. We talked about the webs of the storyboard. I explained how they work together. And we also talked about how the author can write a synopsis about everything that goes in together in the book. So, I just want to thank you for listening today, and have a good night.